it's a thing, isn't it? Left-wingers, their first impulse, you don't agree with me? Right, I'll lock you up. Right, I'll send you to prison. Dissent will not be tolerated. It's coming out of Keir Starmer right now in spades, this, isn't it?
Yeah, the intolerance of the allegedly tolerant. Just yesterday, or the day before, I saw a tweet by Paul Mason, well-known Labour socialist, also for many years, which tells you everything, the BBC's financial editor, who is always calling anybody who's to the right of Jeremy Corbyn a fascist. And yet, of course, he was calling for the immediate shutdown, the complete shutdown of Twitter, of X, for Elon Musk to be banned from the country, absolutely supporting every sort of measure that you would associate with authoritarianism and fascist dictatorship. And unfortunately, we have to remember, the book 1984 was about a radically left-wing government. It wasn't about a far-right fascist government. It's in the very DNA of the left. The radical left, unfortunately, all of the left is now radicalized in this country to act in these very pernicious and sinister ways. And it's all the more sinister. It's more sinister than 1984 because Orwell couldn't have imagined the digital revolution that we've had that makes it so easy to spy on people, that makes it so easy to have a record even of their private conversations on their phones through WhatsApp and so forth. And Big Brother is watching. And this is a direct and deliberate attempt we're now seeing. I think in many ways these protests have played right into the hands of Keir Starmer and the Labour government because they've always planned this. We've known this since the 2020s, before the election, that they wanted to bring in stricter regulation of the internet, stricter regulation of social media companies, and I'm afraid we're going to see some very draconian measures taken in the months ahead.
Yes, MPs are calling for the bosses of X, TikTok, Facebook, also TV stations to be hauled over the coals to explain themselves. You cannot keep making profits from all of this. Now, I think they've got some questions to answer, but in a free country, this is the media. In a free country, the media should be left alone. And this government is going to bring in more and more and more restrictions on the media. I'm in no doubt about that. And I am suspicious about the relish with which our Prime Minister and his henchmen are announcing that all of you who disagree with this, you'll all be put in prison very, very quickly. It's showing their true colours, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, many of the comments that the media elites, the legacy media, and the political class regard as being incendiary are actually views that are held by the normal people in this country. That's how far the window has gone. Things that you would have expected, mainstream parties to express in the 80s and 90s, that's now beyond the pale in terms of what you can and cannot discuss. And of course, they are scared of the new media, of social media platforms that encourage free speech like X, because they run counter to the established narrative. If it wasn't for places like X, we wouldn't know about the Muslim armed gangs rampaging through the streets. We wouldn't have seen them, beating up people, going into pubs. We would only have been given the sanitized, the approved version, which is that all of the violence is coming from one side only, rather than the true picture is that there are problems on both sides here. This is why people are scared in the political class of the free speech platforms like X. And it's also why the legacy media are scared, because, of course, it's about their bottom line, too. So we've seen the Mirror and we've seen others come out in support of these stricter restrictions on social media platforms, because, of course, it's in their economic interest for them to want to see the decline of these social media platforms. But anybody who thinks that the scenes of protest that we have seen around this country is because of people like, Tommy Robinson or Andrew Tate or whomever, I mean, that's not the reason people are protesting. They're,
Exactly right.
on the
Exactly.
ground. The situation on the ground in our neglected towns and cities is so dire and has been for so many decades. That's why people are reacting, because nobody is listening to them.
Yeah, and we've been talking about two-tier policing. It was definitely a thing. There's no doubt whatsoever that Muslim and ethnic communities get treated differently by the police to the white working class. There's no doubt about that, but you just alluded to it, Rafe. We also have two-tier reporting, two-tier journalism. I am looking right now at a screen in my studio, Sky News, with a guy reporting on the trouble in Birmingham, or a gathering crowd in Birmingham. What is the headline on this? Anti-racism protests taking place in cities across the UK. Now, there are anti-racist protesters at all of these gatherings, but to characterise it as that, anti-racism protests across the country, the BBC is doing that the same. That's just a lie. That is mischaracterising. That is propaganda, because they are guilty of two-tier reporting. They don't want to tell the truth. The truth is that these gatherings, these riots, are about people who are fed up with out-of-control immigration.
And we saw how disingenuous Sky News was just the other day, when live on camera, the Muslim Defense League, or a bunch of these very sinister looking, with their faces covered, Muslim youth came fully armed with the most long knives and machetes imaginable right on screen. And rather than actually comment on the live scene behind them, Sky News chose to try to move the camera away and then cut the feed entirely. That's what we're dealing with. And just think, about what happened in 2011, when we saw the last great riots. We saw the political class talking about the injustice, about the poor living conditions that made people riot. We saw the same thing at the time of Black Lives Matter. We saw people like Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner talking about racism and saying, we understand why you feel angry about what happened to George Floyd and the racism and white privilege that exists. We hear none of that attempt to sympathize or understand the reason why people are rioting now.
Yes.
It's a complete opposition. Instead, everyone is far right. They're all fascists. No one is actually asking, why do these people, who clearly have never been in this situation before, because they're not covering their faces, they don't know actually how to behave in those situations. No one's asking why they've taken this drastic step, which has to be deplored, of course. It's deplorable, but there are millions more people than that who are equally angry, who haven't taken to the streets, who share exactly the same concerns, that they are losing their countries. They're losing their country, they feel dispossessed, and their towns and cities have changed beyond all recognition from the cities that they were born in.
And what do you make of this? I've been asking everyone this tonight, and I'll be fascinated by your response, Rafe. We've got this Prime Minister and his cabinet cronies. They're constantly being asked, what is the cause of this unrest, this unprecedented level of unrest across the country? The answer is always something along the lines of this: we've made 400 arrests. This kind of lawlessness will not be tolerated. Yeah, fine. What is the cause? This is pure crime. It is not protest. That's not true. It is protest. Why? What do you make of the fact that our Prime Minister, our leader, and his henchmen just will not confront the reality of what is causing this? They won't even talk about it. They just treat it purely as a law and order issue. It is far more than that, isn't it? Why won't they talk about it?
They won't talk about it because they have created this situation. We have had, in the last 25 years since the election of New Labour, more immigration than in the last 2,000 years combined. Last year, we had more immigration than in the entire decade of the 1980s and part of the 1990s. We've seen the importation into this country of vast numbers of people from culturally incompatible nations. We've seen shocking increase in rape, in violence against women, in homophobia, in anti-Semitism. We've seen Britain's now the leader of acid attacks, honor killings. The Metropolitan Police now has a witchcraft department training police officers in how to detect child abuse linked to witchcraft. You have gangs with machetes on the streets. This country has been is basically in a spiral of decline, and it's at the hands of the Labour Party and the Conservatives that this has happened. And how on earth can they put their hands up to this whole thing and admit that they are the ones who have essentially built a tinderbox that we now see igniting? And I'm afraid it's only going to get worse. We're just in the foothills of what's going to be a very, very messy future, where we're going to see increased strife, increased violence like this, because all of the sociological studies, all of the economic studies show that the increased ethnic diversity on local neighborhood levels leads to a reduction in social trust, leads to an increase in crime, an increase in the deterioration of towns and cities. And essentially, people become much more untrustworthy towards each other. And this is only going to increase.
And to bookend this excellent discussion, this crisis, this situation will not be solved by the Prime Minister indulging his tin pot socialist dictator tendencies by chucking all dissenters in jail, will it?
Well, what we're going to see is yet more of an attempt to try to push this out underground, to silence opposition, to silence critics. But all that does is it make things worse. The very reason that we're seeing the unrest we're seeing is because nobody has been listening to the great British public,
exactly.
The white working class who are at the coalface of all of this, who see the dark side of diversity every single day. They have voted in, the Tories in the Red Wall voted in, nothing happened. Labour's not doing anything about it. That's why we're seeing this. So trying yet again to come down like a ton of bricks on the great British people is only going to backfire, is only going to make things worse, and is going to make a very, very, tense situation only more extreme.